Hi, this is Bighara with another episode of my video blog. Been a little while since I've done one, and I wanted to do a quick one about a topic I was just thinking about recently, for no particular reason other than it was on my mind, and that was clerics and the turning of undead. If you go by the basic D&D rules as they're written, the idea is the cleric can present his holy symbol and try to scare off or destroy a certain number of undead depending on what type they are. The literal wording is that when it successfully turns an undead, the cleric makes it flee, and it will flee from the area if it can. It won't touch the cleric. Some of this has been restated in different ways over the years in different books, but that's the gist of it. I was going to give you a couple of things that I tend to like to try and do when I'm using the undead turning rules in my games. Some of them are house rules, some of them are cobbled together from different systems, but I just was going to talk real briefly about that. One thing I like is a question that comes up frequently is, how long does the turning last for? And some people will just say, it lasts for so many rounds or what have you. There isn't anything actually in the rules in classic D&D saying it lasts a given duration. So the tendency I have is to say the cleric is going to hold up his holy symbol and scare off the undead and everything, and as long as he's going to be holding up that holy symbol and they can see it, the turn can stay in effect. Now that can sound really powerful, but that also means the cleric isn't doing other things like fighting or casting healing spells or doing other things. He is standing there holding off the zombies or whatever it is. So I feel that balances fairly well. Also, once say the ghouls or whatever they are have run out of the room or out of sight, then they're no longer under the effect of that the vision of the cleric doing that, and that means that they might come back later. The other thing is I thought I'd reiterate was it says that they will not touch the cleric. If a PC gets between them and the door, there's nothing saying they won't take a swing at a different PC. Now, some scenarios I've heard described is where a cleric has turned some undead and it's cowering in a corner and it can't flee the room and it's just stuck there. Well, yeah, you can pin it down, so to speak, and then the rest of the party can take pot shots at it and everything. Some people will argue that once the cleric takes a hostile action, that the turning effect ends. But for me, that just goes back to the presenting of the holy symbol. I don't see anything wrong with the idea that while the whatever it is, the ghoul, the zombie, whatever, is cowering in a corner, that the rest of the party starts trying to kill it. I think that's a perfectly valid tactic. Another thing that comes up in some versions of the game and other systems as well is the idea that evil clerics might be able to command the undead instead of making them flee. I'm kind of two minds about that, because just because you're an evil cleric doesn't mean you have some special affinity for the undead. I guess that gets more into what deity you follow. I could totally see it for particular clerics, but not necessarily just because your alignment happens to be evil or chaotic, depending on the alignment scale you're using. So I generally am down on that one. I can see it working in certain settings and in certain instances, but not as a general rule. Another issue that comes up occasionally is in some systems the cleric can also do things like turn what some people refer to as, I believe in Labyrinth it's called infernal creatures, which would be things like demons or devils. I don't know that I like the idea of them being turned like an undead, but if you look in some of the systems where they describe things like, for instance, using a holy symbol with a vampire, not necessarily a cleric, but the old Dracula holding up the cross thing, I like the idea of being able to sort of make them back off a little, but not necessarily the idea that that means they are going to react like a turned skeleton. Also, that gets me back to the idea of the power level. I think once you're dealing with something like a summoned demon or something like that, you're in a different. You're no longer dealing with something like some zombies. You're in a different level of game. One last thing about standard turning I was going to mention. Then I was going to touch on one other subject, where you have the idea of the number that you roll to successfully turn versus an automatic turn versus destroyed. I don't have a problem with that mechanic in general. I would say that what I generally do in my games, especially if there's a mix of undead, in some games you have to choose which undead you're turning. Like, okay, this round I'm going to try and turn the ghouls, next round I'm going to try and turn the white kind of thing. I generally like the idea if it's just a single turning, but the lower powered creatures are going to be affected first. So if you roll your 2d6 for your hit dice affected and you get 7, those 7 one-hit dice skeletons are going to run before the white or whatever it is. The last thing I was going to mention, this goes back to something that JB did in his EX Companion. I really enjoyed I mentioned this in my review in a past episode, the idea that there are certain undead that are too powerful for turning. The idea that even if you're a 15th, 18th, 20th level cleric, you're not going to just automatically destroy a lich or an elder vampire or something like that. These are creatures that are well beyond your just standard wandering monster type thing, and these are often going to be major villains in a campaign or major NPCs or something like that, and the idea that a simple die roll is going to end that whole conflict or potential conflict or that plot point, whatever you want to call it. I don't like it. I like the idea that there are some undead and things like that you're just simply not going to turn. You're not going to turn, if you allow things like demons, you're not going to turn Orcus. You're not going to turn Dracula. Things like that. Which I thought, as I said before, was a great idea in JB's DX Companion, and one that I fully plan to incorporate in my games if we get in a situation where such a creature is encountered. And that's pretty much everything I had to say about turning undead for now. I'll recap by just simply saying the way I work it in my games is you can attempt to turn the undead. If you fail to turn them, you're not going to try and turn that same group of undead again that day. The lower powered undead, if you have a mix of them, are going to be affected first. There's got to be a line of sight. The cleric needs a holy symbol, and he needs to present it and keep presenting it as long as he wants the turning to last. The turned undead are not going to necessarily ignore the rest of the party if they get in their way, although if they have a clear path to flee, they'll take that first. I usually avoid the blanket statement that evil or chaotic clerics can simply control undead instead of turning them. I usually keep that more specific to, if you have something like a cleric that worships Orcus, who's the demon lord of the undead, then yeah, there's that connection there, and that makes sense. I like the idea that, as I said, similar to a non-cleric holding up a holy symbol in front of a vampire, that can hold off something like a vampire a little bit, or at least make it hesitate, or a demon, but it's not going to necessarily make it flee, and it will try and find a way around it. That certain undead are unturnable, and that's generally how I run it. One last footnote to that. Everybody always asks me in my games, when they haven't played that kind of game before, why you have wooden and silver holy symbols in some price lists. And I tell them there is no bonus in turning with a silver holy symbol. It's just something that channels the faith of the cleric. It's not something special about the holy symbol itself. It's just made of a different metal. But the silver holy symbol is more of a status thing. So, if you're dressing up to go see the equivalent of the Pope, you might wear your nice holy symbol instead of the little wooden one. That's all for now. Take it easy.